Fun Ideas Productions presents the Fun Ideas Podcast.
We see the syphilitic shrinking obelisk, the white man's wilting dick. We see through dangling jowls of seedy game show trolls the smiling lie of the televised hive. The witches are watching with their thousand eyes. Witches are watching with their thousand eyes. We smell rotten teeth that speak beyond belief. A stick inside their skull would...
Hi, this is Mark Arnold, and welcome to Fun Ideas Podcast number 63. This episode is sponsored by the fine folks at Lee's Comics.
Hi, I'm George Takei. You know me as Helmsman Sulu on Star Trek. When I'm not busy going Warp Factor 8, I like to beam down to Lee's Comics in Mountain View and spend a lazy afternoon reading comics classics from Marvel to DC, from Dark Horse to Fantagraphics, and everything in between. So please, spend some time here at Lee's Comics and spend your hard-earned cash.
The Fun Ideas Podcast is made possible by listeners like you and from Lee's Comics of California, selling you what your mother threw out since 1982, online at leescomics.com. Headquartered, the timeline of the Monkey Solar Years is out. Get it in paperback or hardback, and soon as an ebook on bearmanormedia.com or at Amazon. My co-author, Michael A. Ventrella, will be attending Beetlefest and selling and signing copies of it and our previous Monkey book there. He will be attending at the end of March. I'm doing the final edits for the TTV scrapbook, and I will be turning it in soon. I just got the assignment to do articles for Back Issue Magazine on Hee Haw and on Sid and Marty Krofft. The Warren Kremer book proof is back, and now we're doing final edits. I'm still working on my own Light Up Your Life travel agency, and of course the Mad book, and a possible new Disney book. Our guest today is a major fan of comic books, where he has done numerous interviews with many Golden and Silver Age creators, both legendary and forgotten. And he's a fan of old-time radio, where he heads up the Reps convention in Seattle. Here he is, Shaun Clancy. Okay, on the phone today I have Shaun Clancy. How are you, sir?
Alrighty. How you been, buddy?
I've been doing pretty well. How are things up in the Seattle area?
It's still raining. Imagine that. Yeah, it's raining pretty good. We get lots of water.
Mm-hmm. So, I usually start out the questioning, if you've listened to my show before, it's like, tell us a little bit about yourself. And in your case, how you got interested in, like, collecting and interviewing comic book people and things like that.
Yeah, I know it's tough to interview a guy who does interviews, so I understand that. I completely can understand where you come from. So I'll just tell you a little about myself. So I think you and I are the same age. I'm 52. And so we probably grew up in the same time frame in the 70s, where we had to go to the old-fashioned, grocery store or convenience store to get our comic book fixes. And I started out with baseball cards. It was probably like 1976 or 75, so I was into baseball back then. And after buying up all the baseball cards from Topps, I saw comic books in a spinner rack at a place called Store 24 in South Lawrence, Massachusetts. And on the rack, I can remember the first comic book I bought, although I had read some of the Harvey books like Richie Rich and such prior to that. But my mom had bought them and brought them home from work, and I'd go through those. But the first comic I ever bought for 30 cents was Captain Marvel 49, which was Al Milgrom, Terry Austin. Scott Edelman was the writer. But anyways, I saw it on the spinner rack. It caught my eye. It was blue and red, and I still remember it. And that got me going. I wanted to find the next issue, but I think it was a bi-monthly issue. And so I started buying other comics, like, Spider-Man and Superman and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And there was also a convenience drugstore down the street that after I'd bought all the comics I could off the spinner rack, and they would leave, you probably remember this, they leave multiple issues, right, because they wouldn't return them right away. So if you needed, like, Spider-Man 3 issues back, they probably still had it on the spinner rack deep into the pile. But then I went to the drugstore, and they had these things called Whitman 3-packs. And they were just reprints of earlier issues with the Whitman logo on them for cheaper in a plastic bag. So I bought up all those too, and that got me going. And then when I really kicked in was when I saw a Sunday newspaper article of a local kid who had, and it was a big spread, color picture, and it's in his living room. He had 2,200 comic books. And I was like, man, 2,200 comic books. How the hell are you kids younger than me? And I'm like 11, 10 or 11. And he's bragging about how he's been getting all these comics from his relatives and stuff. I said, I'm going to be that kid. I want to beat that kid. So I put a piece of paper on my wall. Every time I bought a comic, I'd write it down and just start counting them. Mm-hmm. And that's how I started my collecting.
Now, did you collect? Did you collect all titles, or were you sticking with the superheroes, or what were you doing at that time, typically?
Boy, I was even into Charlton at the time. So the corner comic store, the Store 24, had mostly all superhero. The drugstore carried everything, like Judo Master, Flintstones, like I said, the Whitman 3-pack. So I did spread over to that, and I was also doing a paper route at the same time. That's where I got my money. Mm-hmm. And I would take the money I made from newspapers and go to the store and buy either baseball cards or comic books.
Mm-hmm. And did you get into collecting back issues at that point, or were you aware of them being sold anywhere?
It's funny you bring this up right now, because I'm going through a renaissance trying to figure out when I started collecting back issues, and I saw Mile High Comics just mentioning when they bought the mail order business in 1978. In June of 78, I mean, they just posted like 2 days ago on Facebook. And I'm like, I think that's the time frame. I started trying to collect back issues because I remember seeing their ads inside the comic book. Mm-hmm. And I said, and I remember mailing or calling, I can't remember which, asking them how to do it. And they sent me like a catalog saying you had to do a $10 minimum and order sheet, not a catalog. Mm-hmm. And that you had to list alternatives. And I'm like, alternatives? Well, I had a couple of issues, like Avengers 164, 165, and I didn't have 166, which is the trilogy issue with John Byrne and Jim Shooter with Count Nefaro, so I never had the third part. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh, man, I need to find out how this story ended. So I put that as one of my options and listed some alternatives. Got a friend down the street to chip in with me, and we both sent away for these comics about, it seemed like a lifetime. Back then, but about 4 to 6 weeks later, we got a package of comics. It was almost all the alternatives, and I was like, "Oh man, I didn't get that third part." No, this is probably when I was 11. I didn't get that third part till I was in my late 20s. So you couldn't find it. Could not find that issue anywhere. So there were no comic stores in our suburban area. I didn't know anybody else who really collected comics. I was the only one. I tried to get my friends into it, but they only started and stopped after a couple of issues. So I didn't have any friends who were also collecting when I was collecting. And so I didn't, I stopped collecting when I went to high school and met girls. And then I got married and moved to Seattle. Mm-hmm. And when I got to Seattle, I went to my first comic convention in 1991 when I saw a sign saying, Stan Lee will be at the Tacoma Dome in November. And I was like, man, I'd love to meet that guy. So I went to my first comic show in November of 1991 and met Stan Lee.
And you weren't collecting at that point? You were just...
I was dabbling. When I moved here, I wasn't really collecting at all.
Yeah.
And I just saw a sign at a bookstore, actually.
Uh-huh.
It was a paperback used bookstore, and there was a flyer on the wall, and that got me interested in going back into comic collecting again. And haven't stopped since.
Wow. And do you pretty much collect everything, or do you have special likes or anything you're proud of that you've completed or anything like that?
Well, so the Golden Age side of things I didn't get into until like 1995 or 6 when I made my first deal. It was all money. I didn't care about Golden Age comics. I thought they were stupid. I thought they couldn't hold my attention. You know, I saw them at the library, and I was like, these things stink. So, but when an opportunity arose at my local comic shop that I started joining in '92, and around 1995 or 6, I think, they had a couple of Golden Age comics, and they were looking to get some money to buy a collection here locally. So they were starting to discount some of the comics they had on their shelves, and that's when I started thinking about maybe buying or flipping comics. And, so I started buying them from him, and thought it was easy because I was making money.
Yeah.
And got burned a year later on buying comics through the Little Nickel. It's like a one ad or a yellow page.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
You remember that? You remember that thing?
Yeah.
So, you know, there'd be a state...
I never bought anything through it, but I think it's because I kind of heard rumors about things where you sucked into it.
Oh, yeah. It's like the precursor to Craigslist, you know.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, yeah, this would be cool. And, you know, also Internet was starting to come out, and I just joined AOL at that time. So, and AOL used to have message boards. They're like... what you would consider Facebook pages or CGC forums. Well, before all that, they had AOL message boards. That's where you started wheeling and dealing in the mid-'90s. So anyways, I bought some comics here locally from a guy who had a lot of Golden Age. I'd seen him at some shows. I went to his place in British Columbia, and he told me, you know, these are the exact issues that weren't used for the Gerber Guide. After the Gerber Guide photographed a bunch of comics, they had an auction or sale, and he bought them from Ernie Gerber. Not realizing anything about restoration, I bought, you know, $10 grand worth of comics, thinking, man, I'm going to make a killing. And found out, you know, later when I was trying to flip them that these things were restored, and I didn't even know what restoration was. I thought, you know, restoration was like cars; it would improve the value. Oh, but it didn't. And so I learned a big lesson then.
Okay.
And so I started when I was flipping Golden Age. I started reading some of them, and I started getting attracted to and drawn to the you know, the artists like Matt Baker, Alex Schomburg, L.D. Cole, and that's how I got suckered into it.
Now, is that your preference now, or do you just like a smattering of everything, like Silver Age and Bronze and everything else?
I don't know how you are, but I have an affection for Golden Age and Bronze Age, and I could care less about Silver Age for some reason. It doesn't do anything for me, you know, except for key issues, and it's just money for me. I just I like the time period I grew up in, obviously, in the Golden Age for the nostalgia, but the Silver Age just, there was so much of it, I guess I saw in the 90s that it didn't hold an interest to me to hold, and you know, of course I got some of the key issues for investment purposes, but not because I like them.
Yeah, for me, it's like I like anything older than the 80s, pretty much. You know, it's like it doesn't matter what it is, and I don't really have an affection for any particular time period. It's just, you know, I would say my favorite time period is between 1930 and 1990 on everything. You know, TV, movies, comic books. You know, it's like that seems like when everything was done right. And it's like when Marvel started doing Secret Wars and they did the Crisis over at DC and all that stuff. I was just like, I'm done. You know, it's like, you know.
Right.
I enjoyed it. The weird part is I enjoyed it at the time, but later I got rid of all that stuff and I just said I'm done, and it's like, and of course I have the emphasis on Harvey and everything else, but it's like I still like Marvel and DC to a point, and I am collecting some of those facsimile editions that come out now because I think they're kind of neat, actually. So.
Yeah, I've been buying them up by the truckload.
Yeah.
I mean, for two reasons: to send a message to Marvel and DC that these should probably sound better than their newsstand stuff.
Yeah.
And that they should probably start revisiting why.
Yeah.
And I don't buy. I think the only new issues I buy currently are Conan. Only because I can pick it up and read it and not worry that I just missed 20 years worth of history.
Right.
And maybe Jonah Hex if it comes out. And sometimes I collect by artists that I prefer, like Jim Starlin.
Mm-hmm.
He hooked me with Avengers Annual 7.
Yeah.
As soon as I saw Avengers Annual 7, I thought, I'm going to become a comic book artist. So I started making my own comic book. I started drawing it. I got to like 12 pages. And then got distracted. And
I was going to say, what happened to that career?
yeah. So I actually still wanted to become an artist. So going into high school, or in Massachusetts, you can go to a normal high school or you can go to a vocational school. And the vocational school had stuff like major appliance, cosmetology, cooking, automotive. And they had commercial art. And they had drafting. And my buddy at the time, who now works for the IRS, convinced me to put down drafting as a second choice, in case, because it had something to do with drawing, in case commercial art was full at the high school. And, of course, I'm sure when the high school saw someone wants drafting, well, let's put them in there. Because no one was picking that thing. And so I got into drafting, and... in drafting, I finished my blueprints and drawings on mechanical gears and stuff, and then on my spare time, just start doing fantasy drawings because I was also into Dungeons and Dragons in high school. So I still have a lot of those drawings still left. And then when I left there, I went into engineering and never pursued commercial art because engineering was paying so well that I didn't want to take a step back and I wanted to get out of a low-income area that I was in, so I just kept going in that route, and I'm still involved in that area today.
That sounds like the pattern my dad did. He started off in drafting, then he did engineering. Of course, he ended up going into high-tech sales when it was very lucrative way back when, so, yeah. But, I went into contracting. So when I moved to Seattle in 1991, the economy on the East Coast was pretty bad. Banks were closing up at that time. I don't know if you remember those time periods. 90 and 91 was pretty bad. I worked in an engineering company for 3 years, a big one, for 3 years, where they were laying off people all around me. And I had a sister-in-law that lived in Seattle, and she convinced us to give this a shot because it was a growing economy. And when I came here, I decided to try contracting instead of engineering. And I did design at a contracting firm. And then it went out of business in 2002. And I started my business up in 2003, 2004, and took a lot of those employees, and that's where we're at now. That's cool.
It affords me the luxury of being able to buy all the high-end stuff that I've been buying, including artwork. Right.
Now, of course, you're just now saying you've been a long-time collector and everything like that, but how did it branch off into, like, say... I would call you a historian. You may not do it the same way I do it, but you interview a lot of people, and I know you have a love of collecting original art or recreated original art and things like that. How did those things start coming out of this love of comics?
I was on my 29th birthday, so it's 96, no, maybe it's 30. I'm pretty sure it was 1997, June of 1990. June of 96 or 97. I went to a comic show that was on my birthday, and I went there, and was going there to buy Conan 1. I said, you know what, I got a couple $100. Let me go buy Conan 1. I've been procrastinating. I know it's readily available, but let's get this over with. So I go to the show, and I walk by a table, and there's a guy selling artwork, and it looks like prints. I mean, they were so nice in color and they were Golden Age drawings of Hawkman and the Black Pirate. And I was like, man, this is the first time I ever saw an artist at one of these shows. So I asked him, I said, what's this all about? These prints? And he said, no, the original drawing. And I'm thinking, oh man, I'll never be able to afford these. And I said, how much is this Hawkman? It's like 11 by 17 in color. He said, $200. And I was like, oh, damn it. That's how much I was about to spend on the Conan. So I'm like, do I want a Conan 1 that I can find any day of the week? Or do I want this drawing?
Yeah.
Now, once in a lifetime thing. And the guy's name was Sheldon Moldoff.
Oh, wow.
And Sheldon Moldoff was there just selling stuff. And I bought it, took it home. Wife loved it. I contacted him again because it was a 2-day show. I went back and bought another piece. And then he told me he would be in San Diego that same year. And July? About 6 weeks later. So I said, how about this? I've never been to San Diego. He was bragging about it. If you think this is nice, wait till you go to San Diego. And I said, well, I'd like to buy more of this stuff. So I scheduled, back then you could get a hotel and a plane fare with 6 weeks notice, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
And so did that, you need like 2 years. And, but back then it was pretty easy.
Yeah.
And so I scheduled that. I hired him to do some recreations in the mail. Told him I'd physically pick him up when I saw him down in San Diego. And he was that quick. He did 3 of them for me.
Oh.
And met him down there. I went with a friend. My wife didn't want to go. And my friend and I just got hooked. Well, he'd been doing it longer than I had. He's 10 years older than me, and he was from this area. And he'd been doing Golden Age and selling for a lot longer than me. And we just struck up a friendship at one of my shows. One of the shows, I'm sorry. And then, so when I was in San Diego, I met Dick Ayers, Russ Heath, Don Rosa, Herb Trimpe. Trying to remember who else. Anyways, I still have that Hawkman drawing and recreations that Sheldon Moldoff did for me. He's still on that wall.
Wow.
In fact, they were in my kids' room, actually. So that's how I got hooked on the Golden Age artwork in general. And it also made me interested in finding out more about these people. Talking to Sheldon Moldoff, I had a great time. When I went down to San Diego, Russ Heath, Dick Ayers, they were all very friendly. So I was like, man, I think this might be something about me wanting to find out more about them. So I got home, found a publication called the Jerry Bell's physical print copies of the Who's Who of American comic books.
Oh, wow.
And there were 4 volumes, and Jerry was selling them through the AOL message boards. And he said he only had 3 left. The 4th volume, he was out of print. In fact, these were the last physical copies he had because he was trying to go with a software program.
Right.
So he hadn't gone online yet. But he was selling like floppy disks of his index. But I wanted physical copies, so I bought the 3 volumes that he had. One of them didn't even have the pages cut. I mean, they were all merged together, so I had to physically cut them, so he hadn't even done that. But anyway, so I'm going through these books, and I'm like, and I don't have any friends that are interested in doing what I was about to do, so this is all on my own. And I go through this American Who's Who and look for all the weird names, because if I go for like the John Browns and John Smiths, there's going to be thousands. I'll never find these guys.
Right.
So I was looking for the weirdest names. I tracked them down. It took several times. I mean, this is back in the Yellow Pages and stuff.
Wow.
And contacted probably, I want to say about 50 artists and writers and stuff at that time that had never been contacted, by the way. Like there was a guy that was living in Vegas. His name was George C. Wilhelm. And he was a fiction house artist that he died a year after I got in touch with him. But anyway, in fact, he was terminally ill when I contacted him, and he was bragging about the good news. The good part about being terminally ill, he says, I can have steak with butter now, and no problems. He made me laugh quite a bit. He was talking about his war experiences. He taught me a lot about World War II. He was talking about the chin straps on helmets. When you're in the infantry, you don't ever put this chin strap connection on because if a bomb goes off near you, the concussion from the explosion could snap your neck because your helmet will act like a parachute and just blow your head, pull your head back and snap your neck. Ooh. And I was like, man, I never even thought of that.
I haven't either. Wow.
Yeah, so stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I tracked down as many as I could. Mm-hmm. I couldn't record anything because I didn't know how.
Oh, that's what my next question was. Were you recording some of these? It's like... Yeah,
I gradually tried to. The first guy I ever tried to record was another Fiction House artist by the name of Art Saff, S-A-A-F. Mm-hmm. And he also worked at DC later, but he started his career at the doing Fiction House comics with George Tusk. In fact, George Tusk put me in touch with him. And he was with Nick Cardy and Bob Levers, and they were all friends in Fiction House. And Art Saff was the first one I tried to do it. I bought with the Radio Shack, bought a recorder, and had all these mini cassettes. And I put it hooked it up to the phone and did the interview. Went back to listen to it. It was one of those recorders that only recorded when it heard noise. So, or volume. Oh. And so it was a one-sided conversation.
Yeah. I have a few of those, but I wasn't doing the Radio Shack bit, but I have some of those earlier conversations. I was like, no!
Yeah, so it sucked, So the real first official interview that I did that I actually went to publication with was with John, John Cook, the Comic Book Artist magazine editor. What's his name?
Yeah, John Cook. John Cook. Yeah.
It's Cook. Okay.
Yeah.
So John Cook wanted to. Well, first off, I found Tony DiZuniga, the guy who did Jonah Hex. How I found him was I was buying some artwork or comics to eBay, and a guy named Larry Crook had ran across Tony, and nobody knew where Tony was for 20 years. And he created Jonah Hex. And so I hooked up with Larry, got in touch with Tony, bought all of Tony's artwork, and then found out John was looking to do a Filipino artist issue, comic book artist, and asked me if I could interview Tony. So I did my recorded, which I still have, a real cassette with the phone, and did that interview, sent it to John. Thank God I made a copy because I never got it back. And I didn't get paid either, by the way. So I did it for free. And he published it, and it was, let's see, I think it's 2005. So that was the first one I ever got published. Prior to that, I gave all my contact information to Roy Thomas on Alter Ego because I was a fan of Comic Book Marketplace. Probably you too. Yeah. And when the Comic Book Marketplace stopped being published, or right about there, Alter Ego came out.
Right.
And so I started reading Alter Ego, and so I wrote to Roy and told him, I've got all this contact information for all these artists that nobody's ever bothered to call. And so he hooked Jim Amish, and Jim Amish and I were pretty good friends for about 8 years. And we had a big falling out over the Matt Baker book. But prior to that, I would help him quite a bit on his research and getting in contact with some of the artists. Not all of his contacts were through me, but a majority of them were.
Yeah.
And so I'm still doing them today. There's still a few Golden Age artists still alive.
Yeah.
Like I said, I didn't have really a lot of interest in the Silver Age guys, so I didn't really interview those guys.
Right.
And now I'm interviewing 70s guys because that's the time period I grew up in. Yeah. And they still got memories.
And they're in their 70s now. Anyway.
Just hitting 70.
Yeah, that's... what was I going to say? Who's probably the most obscure person, if there is one, that you found, or just the one that made you the happiest of discovering on your Golden Age interviews.
Okay, so I don't know how much time I got for this, but I'll tell you the one I'm proudest of.
Okay.
So everybody has been interested in Matt Baker. So was I. In the 1990s, nobody knew anything about Matt Baker. You just heard secondhand information from Jack Caban and stuff. And so I recall Ray Osrin was one of his inkers at St. John. So I wrote Ray. Ray and I had a friendship for about 3 years before he died. And he gave me all his memories and stories. But he had gone through a divorce, and his ex-wife had all his photos and stuff. Then after he passed away, I struck up a friendship with his ex-wife. And so we got to talk, and I interviewed her. She's one of the people who we quote in the Matt Baker Art of Glamour book, by the way, that we did in 2011 or 12. Anyways, in her stories, I was asking her who was Matt Baker and Ray Osrin friendly with, and she said a guy named Frank Gisto was pretty good friends with them. And I'm like, who the hell is Frank Gisto? And so I'd go online and I'd spell it, Guisto, the normal way. And I couldn't find this guy for my life. And I said, you know what? Maybe they just heard it wrong or spelled it wrong. So I said, let me mix it up. So I wrote Giusto. Boom, one guy in New York, still alive. And so this was probably 2009, 2010. So I call him up. And I said, did you know Matt Baker, the guy who used to draw comic books? And he said, oh, hell yeah. I know him very well. He said, I have drawings from him. I have letters from him. I have photos. Yeah, we were best friends. And I was like, good God. So I was at work when I called him. And I wasn't anywhere near recording him. I said, oh, hold on, Frank. Let me run to my house. Record this while it's still fresh in your mind and before you're influenced by outside forces.
Right. So
I run home, close up my office and get the hell out of here and go run home, turn on the recording device, and it took about a half hour. And in that half hour, he went into his, filing cabinet and pulled out some letters and stuff from him. So we got to talk, and then we became good friends, and he's still alive.
Oh, wow.
He's 91, still living in New York, in Flushing. And he's quoted, and I bought the artwork and photos from him. But Matt Baker was one of those guys that I always admired. And so that's the one I'm most proud of, because, spelling of his name was weird. I doubt anybody would have found the guy because he wasn't in the industry. He went into advertising after the 50s. Yeah. And, in fact, here's a side note. His wife, Frank's wife, and Vinnie Coletta's wife were in college together. Oh. So Frank's wife hooked up Vinnie with his wife, and Frank is the one who got Vinnie into becoming a comic artist. They worked together in an advertising firm, and he told me he should try comics.
Wow.
Yeah, stuff like that. So that's the one I'm most proud of. The most obscure. Yeah. Good God, that's a tough one. I remember calling up. The waiter's call I had was, what the hell's his name? Marvin Stein? Is that right? Marvin Stein, who worked at Jack Kirby's Studios?
Well, that sounds right. I don't know.
Yeah. I just remember calling him telling me he wasn't feeling well, calling back later, didn't pick up his phone, found out the next day he died.
Ooh.
Yeah, that was the weirdest call. The most obscure, I remember going through my Gerber guides and finding Leo Amelia on all those early action covers and the adventure covers from DC. And I went and looked him up, and I found his name, and he was supposedly still alive. So I called him up, and it's his son. It's Leo Amelia Jr. And he's like 75 years old, and he's talking about his dad and about his days in comics, and he was more renowned for being a sports artist for newspapers and such. And then Leo dies in a couple of months. A couple of months after that, Leo died. And that was probably one of the obscure guys that I kind of remember tracking down and calling. So, and all the the ones nobody heard of, like at the Harvey place.
Right.
Stan Harvey and stuff.
And
those were actually referrals.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was just going to ask, I mean, it's like, usually it's like word of mouth after you get an initial contact, right?
Yeah, and if you treat them right, and, you always praise their work, and, you don't try to ask the tough questions,
Right.
And try to get them to gossip or not. You have to know them well enough for that.
Yeah.
And then when they tell you it's off the record, you have to honor that.
Yeah.
As you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a ton of stuff off the record. I'd love to print one day, but I can't.
I know how that is. It's like, it's the most juicy thing. I can't say this on the record. Oh, well, tell me anyway. And I've done some transcriptions of your interviews, and I go, wow, that's cool stuff. But can't use it.
But like I tell the guys I interview, I won't print it, but it's good to know so I know what to look for down the road. It helps me in my research.
Yeah.
In getting the real information instead of just hearsay.
Yeah. And, I have a few things like that. And sometimes you can skirt around the issue. Somebody will tell you something, well, I won't say the name, but this happened. And then you contact somebody else, and they go, oh, yeah, it was Bob that did that. And they're like, it's like, it's just totally direct. It's like, cool, now I know.
Right. Like when I contacted Stanley Kaufman was an editor at Fawcett, okay? And he changed his name, spelling of his name like 3 times, okay? And so I'm doing this Archie's Betty video in 2010 and 2011, and my partner had shown me some of his work previous on documentaries, and one of the guys he interviewed as a movie critic in New York was Stanley Kaufman. I said, is that the same Stanley Kaufman that was an editor at Fawcett? So I email him, he puts me in contact with him. He says, yeah, that's me. And I said, great. Can you tell me some stories about Fawcett? He said, I wrote a book. I said, good. I wrote a book to him, got it. All the names have changed. He made up names of everybody that worked at Fawcett because he didn't want to get sued. So it's hard to figure out who's doing all these practical jokes or cheating on their wife or whatever. So you don't know anything. He wouldn't tell me.
Wow.
He said, you'll have to just assume whoever you think these people are, that's who they are, because I'm not going to tell you. But he never did. He's gone too.
Wow. Well, you mentioned that documentary. I was going to ask you about that at some point. So how did you get involved in doing that documentary, the Betty's, what was it called again?
It was Archie's Betty.
That's right. I should know this. I own a copy of it. Archie's Betty is the documentary. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I have to back up a little
Okay.
more. So let me think how it went. So one of the guys I contacted and found and got interviewed was another Fawcett editor named Roy Auld, and this is probably 2007, 2008, I'm guessing. And so Roy Auld was in a nursing home, and he was in his 90s, and I interviewed him, but his memory was sharp. I mean, he knew everything. Well, he was the editor at Fawcett who was in charge of the Negro romance comics.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And, the Captain videos. Yeah. So he also told me that he wrote them. And I said, he said that when you're at Fawcett and you're an editor, you're on salary. They don't pay you to write. So what you do is you have someone use their name, and he said he used his sister's name to submit scripts, and since he was the editor, he hired this woman's name, and so he submitted, so he doubled it. And so anyways, I told Roy Thomas about this, and, this would be a great interview, and he hooked me up with Paul Hammerlink with the Fawcett Collectors of America, and I said, there you go, Paul, here's the information. Give Roy a call. I got a call like a week later, and it's Roy Auld, complaining that Emilio Squiglio, who's also a Fawcett artist and a friend of Jim Amish, for instance, called and badmouthed me. And I said, I don't even know who Emilio is. Why would he badmouth me? I don't even know him. So he said, I just want to tell you, I only want to deal with you. If you want any interviews with me, it has to be with you. I said, okay, understandable. So Roy Thomas contacts me and says, PBS, the History Detectives TV show,
Oh, yeah.
wants to, had heard that that the guy who was doing an episode on Negro Romances, and they heard that I knew somebody who was involved in the project. I said, I'll put you in contact with him, the TV station.
Mm-hmm.
But I've got to warn you, he's temperamental. And he put down the restrictions that he said, unless Shaun's in the video with me, or the TV show with me, I'm not doing it. And I said, I don't want to go to New York. I don't want to fly to New York for this stupid thing. What am I going to say?
Yeah.
So anyways, they wanted me there. I go there. He backs out the last second. Why am I bringing this? Oh, so it's around 2009. And while I'm out there and traveling at their expense, I go to Massachusetts because it's only 4 to 6 hours away. And I grew up there. Meet my dad. Talk to my dad about what's going on. And he tells me about, did you know Archie was created in Haverhill High School, which was the city I grew up in, or next to the city I grew up in, and lived in Haverhill for a couple of years. But he grew up in, and my mom grew up in, my grandparents grew up in, and all that stuff. And I said, I think at this stage, in 2009, I would have heard something by now. That's news to me. So,
that's weird. You'd think you would have heard it as a kid or something, you know? Anyway.
That whole area doesn't even, there's no statues. They don't embellish it at all. And so when I went online, I did some research, I found out he was right. So I started contacting the Montana family, his kids, and people who were involved with Archie, and I found a guy, Gerald Perry, who did an interview or did an article on the connection back in 1989, 1990, and I lived there, and I don't remember that. and they had a little get-together at our college and all that stuff, which completely went by me. And so I contacted him and told him about what I planned on doing at that time with a book. And he said he would be a part of it, and he wanted to be a part of it. And I said, okay, so we started it as a book. Until I found one of my interviews with Harry Lucy's daughter, Barbara, Tincredi, she mentioned that the influence for Betty Cooper was her aunt. And I said, is your aunt still alive? She said, yeah, she's 90. And so she put me in contact with her. She lived in New Jersey. I found some interviews of Bob Montana where he mentioned Betty was based on a real girlfriend of his, and they had dated for a year in 1941. And she wasn't open to the idea that she was the influence for it, but I convinced her after I found her name mentioned in the strip and all that. So once I found that, I went back to Gerald Peary and said, this is actually going to be bigger than I thought. Do you have any ideas about, I'd like to go to a major publisher instead of the, like the Bear Manic kind of guys. And he said, let me see about, I have some time, maybe we can do a documentary. And I said, okay, sure, I'm open to that, sure. And we'd be co-producers. And I said, okay, sounds good. We never had a real contract. We immediately set up the video interviews, and then figured out all the financial stuff after we got all the key ones because these people were in their 90s. So we interviewed a couple of people that went to the high school with Bob Montana and such. Go along, okay. I don't know if you've done documentaries, but that all was pretty quick.
Oh, yeah.
We did all that in 6 months, right?
Yeah.
Thinking, this will be out by Christmas. Oh no, no. All the tough stuff and money is way after that. The production, music, sound, lighting. You talk about the boring stuff. That took 4 years.
Yeah.
And we had several cuts, the test showings, and I was really proud of what we had the first couple of times we did test shots and showed to our audiences, and he started changing. I wanted to look at it as a history detective, like an ongoing anthology where, we could, this is the mystery of Archie's connection to Haverhill. Then we could do another video on something else related to comics or whatever, and keep it going, right? But he started changing it, and he was the director and writer, and he had all the experience. So I was just a producer. So I just supplied all the information, the money, and so he started changing it more, and you saw the video about himself, and so he goes into a period of 15 minutes about his own history, and that's where we started arguing. And I said, I don't think this is going to hold well. I think if you do that, we could have a much better film the way we started doing it. So when it premiered in 2015, right a couple of weeks before it, I offered him buy me out, and he did. And so I don't have any ownership in that. But I told him, I'd help promote it, which I did. I went to New Jersey and showed it, and went to Seattle and showed it, and sat there for questions and answers. And I just when I split with him, I told him I wanted to take all the unused footage, all my own interviews, and all my stuff with me under my ownership, and he allowed that. So I could still make my own film if I wanted to. Cool. So I wasn't really happy with it, but it's better than nothing.
Right. Yeah, I remember you had some sort of issues with that at the time. I didn't know the exact reason why, but that's, that makes sense. But yeah, if you're not in complete artistic control, sometimes it is, you just kind of have to pull your hair and go,
I was really happy. I gave advice. Yeah. I told him what I thought. I would like to see it. He's a movie critic. He wrote for the Boston Globe. He's a movie critic and a professor at college. So he was doing test audiences in the colleges, and the feedback he was getting was the direction he moved the film in. And I just told him, in the comic book world, I think you're going in the wrong direction. He says, well, I'm trying to reach a wider audience. I said, if you will reach too wide, you're going to disenfranchise all of them. Right. So, which way you want to go? Yeah. And, we had some heated arguments about it. And I had, this is a guy with no experience trying to tell somebody who's done, 3 or 4 films already that he's doing it wrong. Yeah. And so it didn't, it showed well to the local communities, but once he started moving into other areas, it didn't do well at all. Yeah. And so he's lost quite a bit of money. So. That's too bad.
I liked as an outsider just watching it, I liked it for what it was, but yeah, it was too long and draggy about certain topics, if I remember correctly. I haven't watched it in a while, but the actual discovery of Betty and things like that were actually really fascinating, because as a kid, I just always assumed Archie, Riverdale's probably based on something in New York and New Jersey or something. I never really thought about Massachusetts. It didn't even occur to me, because I figured everything in comic books was New York, so.
But I had a lot of interviews we didn't use. They're all dead now. Everybody in interviews is gone now. Yeah. But I have video and recorded interviews of all that whole area with a lot of backstory. In fact, Bob Montana had 4 kids. 2 of them lived in New Hampshire at the time. One of them's in Maine, and the other one lives here, Snohomish, in Washington State. And he's the youngest son, and he and I hit it off great. And I showed him stuff he didn't even know about his dad. They did not know about Betty. So that was a complete surprise. But and Betty had photos of them together, so that's what clinched it. But it was pretty. I'm pretty proud of that discovery. And of course, I tried to do an Archie book since. Yeah. And as you know, it's tough to do an Archie book and tell the truth and not get sued. Yes. so nobody wants to print it. There's not enough money in it. Right. To write the real story about Archie.
Right. Backing up a couple steps, because you just said a couple things, and then I'll get back on this. The stuff you did for the History Detectives, did you actually appear in that episode, or you said you did not?
Oh, I did. Oh, okay. I did. In fact, I'll give you a little hint. That series ran about 8 years. Yeah, something like that. They wanted me to be a frequent guest. Oh. Okay. And the reason why was because when I got there, they didn't know what they were talking about. They had no clue. Their research team would just it's not on the air anymore, so it's okay. Yeah. So their research team was a bunch of people in an office looking on the internet, trying to track down, stories that they see in Wikipedia or whatever, and it was wrong. Right. Because Alvin Hollingsworth, a black artist, was supposedly involved in the project as the artist. I'm not 100% sure he was, but Roy Alt says he was. I said, okay, if you say he was. And I knew Alvin. And Alvin became a fine painter. You know, I talked to him about his comics once. He was ashamed of it, or embarrassed about it, not ashamed. He wanted to be known for his fine art. And that's all he wanted to talk about when the one conversation I had with him. So he passed away. He was dead before the show. But his widow was pretty close to where we were filming. And I said, well, you know, the good news is that we can go to the widow's place. So we filmed a whole day and a half there. And I hooked it all up. We went in there. They did a lot of shooting. We went to the attic, and this original artwork there, pulps, comics. So she still had all of Alvin's stuff. And they didn't use any of it. They cut the entire episode, which I am in, into a 9 or 10 minute segment. And the reason they filmed me was because what they do is they film several historians. I can't remember.
I think wasn't Jerry Beck in that one?
No.
Or it might have been a different segment. I know he was on one of them. So anyway, it was just.
Yeah, not with this one. I was on the same episode. We were the last segment in the 3-segment thing. Okay. And I'll never forget when it originally aired. My kids were young. They're like 3 and 2, or 4 and 2. And it was showed at 9. And I said, you got to stay up and watch this. Well, why? I was going to surprise them, that day's on the episode. And so they fell asleep before, because it was so boring for the other 2 segments. They fell asleep before it happened. So I did get a call from 3 people, because I didn't tell anybody I was going to be on the show. Some people would tell all their friends. I didn't want to tell anybody. And so a friend from back east called me up in Maine, because it was showed 3 hours earlier, because of time difference. So I didn't know that. And so he called me up and told me before it aired here in Seattle all about it. And a guy in New Jersey, a Golden Age artist named John Balkiewicz, who passed away last January, he called me too. And I didn't even know he watched that show. And my dad, but didn't tell either.
Yeah.
And in fact, my dad calls me every time it re-airs. So those are the only 2 people who called me. And then one more person. I work in heating and air conditioning. And a couple of days later, one of my suppliers from Thermal Supply, where we buy material and stuff, the counter guy who sells me stuff showed up and said, I didn't know you were in the comics. And I'm like, uh-oh. Because nobody at the office knows anything about you. So now everybody does.
Right. So
he told everybody about, I didn't know you were such a great historian. I said, I don't know about great, but I was on the show.
Yeah.
So it was that part was fun.
I must not have known you then, I guess, when that aired, because I remember that story. But I'll have to look at it. I know all of them, at least until pretty recently, are streaming online on the PBS website or something, so you can watch every episode. So I'll probably have to take a look again and see.
Well, they sent me a DVD of it, and photos and all that good stuff. What they do is each segment is subcontracted. So a division that did our section was called Lion TV. And so Lion TV, they go out and say, who wants to do this segment? Who wants to do that segment? So they have all these people from, college programs that are learning the trade, and they get together and they go film the segment. And I can't remember her name, but the main woman, they had like 3 experts in the show. And the older woman, who's a college professor, was in our segment, and she's supposed to know all this stuff, and I had to fill her in, so she knew what she was talking about. They interviewed me extensively, and they only used me for, a couple of minutes.
Right.
But it was fun. It got me some exposure and put my name on, and I wanted to do it. If I was ever to do any type of things with historian stuff down the road, I thought it would be a nice credential, and it helped. Yeah. It helped, and then haven't done one since.
Yeah, I guess that answers that question. I was wondering if you had participated with Johnny Harvey's Ghost Empire, the Harvey documentary he's working on.
He did contact me.
Oh, okay.
I think I mentioned this to you before, but he contacted me and told me he wanted to do. He was doing something. He was going into Portland for something. I can't remember who he was talking to talk to. It wasn't you though, because I recommended you instead of me.
Oh.
But he was going to Portland and wanted me to go down there and do an all-day interview and stuff. I said, well, it's, like three hours one way. I don't know if I can take that much time. And you had just moved to the area, maybe 6 months before that. And I said, you knew more than me, as far as I knew, about Harvey. And he said he didn't know you were in Oregon. And I said, yep, it is his contact information. And I thought he got in touch with you.
He did get in touch with me, but ironically not at that time. I think he called me, but how he finally got me on the interview is almost a year ago now, last February, excuse me, so it has been almost a year. He flew me down to L.A., so I did it down in L.A., so, but I brought my 2 suitcases full of comics, toys, and everything, and I was like sweating bullets because I never bring my collection around like that. It's like, but nothing got significantly damaged. I will say that. And it turned out to be a pretty good thing. They shot footage of me all day, and then I was exhausted. I mean, this is really, really quick. So I went in the other room and took a nap, and they took all my comics and were like shooting pictures of them and while I slept. And then I got up later and go, what's going on? Oh, we just finished shooting all the toys and everything you brought. Oh, cool, thanks. And then they took me to the airport. I went home, and it was like the quick, 30, what would 3 days be? The quickest 3 days, 48 hours or something is like, wham, bam, done, But he's in that phase that you're talking about that you said on the Archie's Betty, where, it's like he's got
post-production.
Yeah, he's gotten the interviews, but now he's trying to raise more money. He's trying to do the music and trying to do the editing and trying to do this. So I don't know how fast he wants to get it done this year, which I hope he does, but I know how that goes.
I mean, I'll give you an example. I don't mind talking about costs.
Yeah.
So, like getting a fair use lawyer, just because you can't use the image of, like, for me anyways, on our film, we couldn't use the Archie image on the front.
Right.
So on the on advertisement or on the cover, but we can Bob Montana was a fair game. But we had to hire a fair use lawyer, and he cost like $60,000.
Oh, geez.
It was ridiculous, and I had to do all the research. So I had to go we had to hire someone at the Library of Congress to go do all the research for copyrights for every image. I mean, I got a spreadsheet you wouldn't believe of all the images that we used and didn't use. And when it was first, if the copyright was expired and such, and it was painstaking.
Yeah.
Painstaking.
Yeah.
Every image. And then you had to have not stenograph, but you had to type up the entire discussion from the film, line by line item, and then so you have a recording in case you're doing the for the deaf. So I can't remember what it's called. Subtitle. Yeah. So it was just horrendous. The most unsexiest stuff that you can think of for our film. And, a lot of people don't understand that.
Yeah, I've done a lot of film production, but strangely, most of the stuff I've done in my career has been on the front end. So I've either been interviewed, or I've been interviewing, or I've been running like camera or something like that. So I've never done like the back end editing for the most part on things, except maybe like this podcast or something. But it's like, but I know how to do this quick and dirty. So it's like that's why I can do it. But yeah, it's like to spend all that time after that would kind of drive me nuts. It's almost like when I write my books, if the book's done and then it takes another 2 years for it to be published, that would drive me mad.
Just like the Kramer book, yeah.
Right. Yeah, that one's kind of driving me mad, but I'm supposed to be getting it pretty soon. I mean, at the last update, I asked Bob. This is Bob. Where's it coming? And he says, "Oh, I'll get to you by January or February." Well, okay, it's almost February, but
Right.
But I will let everyone else in the Kramer family know, as soon as I get it. It's like everybody gets a copy, of the email, and it's like, all right, this is the final edit now. So that's where we're
I'll
at.
tell you what, though, they are happy about the approach you're taking and the allowed time and wanting to do it right and all that.
Yeah.
They're impressed with the attitude you have about the book. So
Yeah.
I don't know if they've expressed that to you.
Yes, I mean, we had our friction at times, I admit, I did and they did, and, but we got it all squared away, and I think everybody's happy, so that's what I'm happiest
I think
about.
so, too. It's an outstanding book. I think it's your best work.
Well, I hope it comes out well. It's like I'm using a different publisher, and I think that, will help, too, so it's like, and...
No, yours was easy to read. It didn't bore me to tears. You didn't rehash stuff I already knew. Sometimes some people have a knack for trying to explain a story in a comic book. Take a comic book story and try to write it in a story and explain how the story proceeds. I hate that.
Yeah.
I've read the story. I don't need to see it again.
Yeah.
So, but you did a very good job.
Well, thank you. Well,
I can't wait for it to come
the
out.
secret I have on all my books, and I've told everyone, maybe not on this podcast, but I've told people I know, is like, I write books that I want to read. It's like, nobody's going to write a book about Warren Kremer. But I want to read one about Warren Kremer, so how do I do that? It's like, well, I got to write it, and I'm a little bit too close to it. I mean, which is unfortunate. But after time, then I can kind of enjoy my books. It's like it's kind of weird. It's like when I'm doing them, I'm like, get this book away from me. Like the Harvey Companion, that one drug out for a while, and I was like sick of it by the time it came out. And now I can kind of look at it and go, okay, there's problems with every one of my books, but I try to overlook that and just say, yeah, that came out pretty well. I got most of the stuff I wanted in there. There's a few things that didn't, but I'm not going to worry about it. So, so.
No, that's another book that I liked a lot of. No, I think in the Dennis the Menace one, the Hank Kitchen one, that's another, both of those books were almost the same time period.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you kudos. This is going to be a big kudos show here at this point. Kudos for getting Ernie Colon to do that cover before he passed. Kudos for getting some of those photographs of Ketchum's boyhood home, or what's there now, or whatever.
Yeah, that was a surprise. Remember, see, what people don't realize is the wasted research, because don't forget, we spent a couple of weeks tracking down a Ketchum family member that had nothing in the same age period. By the way.
Right.
So it all matched out.
Sometimes it happens.
And so we wasted time tracking down a guy with the same, last name that was supposedly a relative of Hank's, and it was not to be. And all the stuff you never see.
Yeah. But, that's a weird thing. I will say this about the Dennis the Menace book. It's like people who love it, I mean, who know Dennis and want to read about Dennis, they love it. But it's, like, not a very good seller for me. It's like, everybody's like, who cares about Dennis the Menace? But it's like, I put a lot of effort into that because, I like the character. Sorry. But,
No, I like it too. I try to, if I have some tangible knowledge or contact information, so I help a lot of people with books. And in fact, I get books in the mail for free that I don't even know what I did. I have a whole shelf here of books here that thanking me for contributions, like Trina Robbins gave one, like Pretty in Ink or something. Where is it? Can't find it. But anyways, I got it in the mail, thanking me for the contributions I did to the book. And I'm telling you, I don't think I did anything. I don't remember.
I have a few of those.
I remember helping her. Because sometimes, by the time you help somebody with research, the time it's printed could be years.
Right.
So and it may even be just one little photo or a comment or something, so you forget all about it.
Yeah.
But I always like helping somebody who's doing good work.
Yeah.
And so I have no problems with helping you at all.
Well, thanks.
Your stuff is great.
Yeah. Well,
keep it up.
Find me some obscure Mad Magazine stuff. That's what I'm kind of working on now.
Well, I showed you some of the stuff I have.
Yeah.
So just tell me if you need it.
But the other thing I'm finishing up, if we're talking about my books, is the Total Television Scrapbook, and I'm working with the daughter of her name's Victoria Biggers, and she found this scrapbook of her dad's that had all these storyboards and scripts and all sorts of things that, when I was talking to Buck Biggers, he acted like he didn't have anymore. So that's going to come out in the new book. So,
Wow. And you got others in the pipeline you're thinking about, or
well, those are the two that. Kramer, that one, the sequel to the Monkeys book is almost done, and then the Mad book is pretty much the only one that I'm kind of working on now, and I'm trying to keep it. Well, there's a couple I can't talk about because they're being negotiated. I'll put it that way. So, but in general, I'm trying to keep it down where I only have like 1 or 2 book projects, because there's a while there I had like 4 going at the same time. It was driving me nuts. 4 is a little too much. I had the Kremer book, I had the Harvey book, I had the Monkeys book, and I had the Total Television book or something. All at the same time, and I'd start working on one, and then I'd get like. Something back from the other, so I'd have to shift gears and go over there, and it's like, nah. Anyway, but the hazards of being an author.
I don't have a writing background at all, and it's the toughest part for me. Interviewing's pretty good, but having to write is tough. And I'm working with, I told you before, Mike Urey on his, what's the nostalgia? Retrofan magazine. Yeah. And so he's making me write intros and bridges and stuff, and edit my own stuff, and I'm getting pretty good at editing now. So I'm actually enjoying that part. But having to create, I have to write intros to the people I'm interviewing and give it a little bios and how I know them, and then do the interviews, and then bridge them. And it's I don't know how you do it. I don't. It's tough for me.
Parts of it come easy, parts of it don't. I mean, it's like the hard part sometimes is to make it like some cohesive sense out of it all. It's like I got this interview over here and this one over here, and they're not. How do you link all this stuff together? But I found out I had sort of a talent and knack for it, but also, like I said, I write books that I want to read. So I'll just mention a couple people that have done books in the past, like Steve Cox, who did a bunch of books about various TV shows and stuff. And I go, I want to write books like that. So I kind of, really paid attention to how they wrote books and what made it interesting and what was boring in certain books, and it's like, it's what you said, if you describe a comic book story, for 10 pages that goes on longer than the comic book story went. Let's say it's, like it was a 5-page story, you took 10 pages to describe it. Why not just reprint the story and just say, here's the story, or at least a couple frames to kind of give a gist of what's going on. But I get it. It's like you just try to make it flow and make it kind of conversational and things like that. That's the best advice I can say about how to write. But you have to have kind of a passion for it too. But anyway,
are you working with Mike on Retrofan?
I've tried to get something for that, but he's kind of odd with me about that. He keeps sticking me with back issue, which I'm fine with. So I've gotten a couple more articles lately, and I said, and I don't argue with him. I don't say, shouldn't this be over in Retrofan? It's like, wherever he wants to put me, I'll take it. So, it's like, so back issue seems to be my domain. I've done a few things for Alter Ego, but Retrofan is still pretty elusive for me, even though I'm friends with Michael, so I don't know. One of these days.
His wife does transcriptions, right? And so I talked his wife into. I shouldn't say talked, and I asked her if she was open to taking on transcriptions that had nothing to do with the publication. I would pay her. Mm-hmm. And so for the last 2 months, she's been doing. I'm catching up on because I have literally, you know this because you've done a couple for me, 50 or 60. Recorded interviews I've done over the last 10, 15 years that I just never transcribed, and so she's been doing those for me. Cool. And she's fast. Mm-hmm. And where am I going with it? So she'll listen to his interview, Fan article. And so he'll contact me, hey, do you think you can pull that up? And so that's what we're doing.
Oh, okay.
And so I've got like 3 assignments that way so far.
That's cool.
And the one that's coming out, I'm supposed to plug it. So Retro Fan 6 is in March. And it's my contribution is to June Lockhart. So I did.
Oh, okay.
I actually did the June Lockhart from Lassie in Boston Space. I did that interview. I want to say 6 years ago. And I was going to use it for our radio magazine. That I'm a part of a radio group here in Seattle called Radio Enthusiasts of Future Sound, and I have been since 2005. And we were going to publish in that, but the readership's like 200, 300. So I didn't want to waste it on that. So I pitched it to Mike, and he was all for it. And so and she's still with us, brother.
Right.
So. And she had and the reason I was going to pitch it for the radio magazine because newsletter is because she had radio credentials, so she started a career in radio, and her parents were in radio, and so I was able to do a lot of back and forth with her on that, which we crossed out. We just covered her TV experience for the Retro Fan magazine, so I can always use the radio portion for the newsletter if I choose to down the road.
Yeah.
And that's another part of interest to me is the old time radio, like I mentioned before, and you know that because you come up for our shows.
Yeah.
And I got into it through comics. If you got a few more minutes, I'll tell you how that happened.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm in Haverhill, Massachusetts, living in 1980s, so I'm about 13, and they had those Power Record comic books.
I remember those.
Those 45s, and the library had them.
Wow.
And so I'd go to the library, and I'd rent it and put it on a record player and burn through those and bring them back. And then I moved to Haverhill because I lived in Lawrence at the time. I was listening to them at the library. I went to Haverhill. I just moved there. And went to that library, asked them if they had any of the comic books on record. And they said, no, but we have all these radio shows on record. And this library had record players with headphones, probably a dozen of them, all along the floor, and nobody was listening to anything. And they said, you can listen here all day long if you want. So I got the first radio show I ever listened to was Three Skeleton Key. And it was a suspense program, and Vincent Price is in it. And it's about a lighthouse. I don't know if you've heard the show, but it's about a lighthouse at night in the fog, and an abandoned ship crashes onto this lighthouse island, and it's full of starving rats.
Oh, wow.
Because there's nothing to eat on there. And so these rats just swarm over this lighthouse trying to get into these 3 guys. Now, I'm 13. Listening to this at the library, scared out of my pants. And that's how I got hooked.
Oh, wow.
And,
I'm not sure if I've heard that exact episode, but I've heard many episodes of Suspense, so yes.
It's good. They've re-aired that and redone it with different cast members. There's probably 3 or 4 versions out there.
I guess
it's a classic.
I guess I got into radio because, my dad talked about radio. He says, well, when I was a kid, it was all on radio, and everything. But also, in the 70s, CBS had Mystery Theater that was newly produced. And my dad found out about it, and he says, hey, they got a new radio show, you can listen to it, and, that went on for a few years. There's actually a book about it, too. I don't know if you know Martin Graham's.
Of course.
He did a book about that, I believe. He's done a book about, every radio show, so it's like, if you think I'm prolific, it's like, no, I'm not, compared to him. I believe he did one about that, and, it's like, that's what got me hooked to old-time radio. And then I was in San Francisco Bay Area at that time, and one of the radio stations, KFRC, switched from a pop rock format to big band era format and started playing old radio shows along with Sinatra and everything else like that. So, I started listening to everything like that. So it was kind of cool. So, and been to a few Spurtbacks, and then I went up to your to Reps. Yeah.
I actually forgot to mention one thing. So before I heard that old time radio thing, there was a radio live show I tried to listen to, and I'm thinking it's 1980. You have to fact check this. But Star Wars was going to be live on radio. George Lucas was doing a radio version of Star Wars, and it was at like 9 o'clock or something like that. Anyways, I fell asleep 10 minutes into it, and so I never heard it. But it was the first time I ever tried to listen to a live radio recreation or reenactment of a show, and it was supposed to be a Star Wars tie-in with some of the cast members still in it. And so that was the real first show I ever tried to listen to. But anyways, just like in comics, none of my friends were involved in old-time radio. I couldn't find anybody else that was interested in it. Nobody cared about old-time radio. And I was in New England, where Cape Cod Mystery Theater was, and Baud and Ray, they were on the air all the time. And until I got to Seattle. Costco used to have these 60 cassette packages of old-time radio. I don't know if you remember these. And so I started buying those at Costco in the 1990s, and that expanded my horizon on other radio shows I never heard of. But I couldn't find a club. The club that I did eventually join, it was like a secret society. You had no idea where they met. Nobody knew where it was. There was no advertisement, you had to know the password. It was ridiculous type of stuff. And if I had gotten involved earlier, I would have participated in quite a bit of original material that they had done in the 1990s, because they got a hold of a lot of people like Burl Ives, John Archer. All these people lived here at the time. They all were passed away by the time I joined. And we did get, as many as we could to do our performances, and almost all of them are gone now. We probably have, 6 to 7. We started a couple of years ago expanding, as you know, into TV, getting people that were in TV and doing radio versions of their roles in TV. So we would take a Leave It to Beaver with Tony Dow, for instance, and transfer it into a radio script and do a recreation of that, or a John Provis Lassie, or that type of stuff. Right. And we're one of two. I think Spurtvac and Reps are the only radio organizations still around. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. And dwindling membership, by the way.
Speaking of which, when is the next one? The next convention?
I'm glad you brought that up. It's coming up in March.
Okay.
It is.
Okay.
Give me a second. You can cut this part out. Let's see here. March 27th, 28th, and 29th.
Cool.
So March 27th, 28th, and 29th. And if you're going to ask me who the guests are, I can't remember the woman who was on Mission Impossible.
Barbara Bain? Or
no,
later on?
The wife of, it's the last season or something.
Oh, Joanne Flug, is that her name?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with her TV credits.
Yeah.
I'm going on.
That's probably your biggest claim to fame, being on 2 seasons of Mission Impossible. So, she's on the match. She was on the Match Game.
And Diana Canova, she was here last year too. That's Judy Canova's daughter. Yeah. But then she was also on Soap, so she was. There she is. Okay, so our guest list is, come on. There's a picture of her, but they don't say who she is. Come on. Oh boy. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
But Tommy Cook will be here. We'll have probably Margaret O'Brien. We're still fine, and she's been here a couple of times already, and we're just finalizing that right now, actually. We have our conventions are Friday, Saturday, and and sometimes we have a brunch on Sunday where we honor one of the radio people that continually comes here every year. And that will be Ivan Curry. And that Ivan Curry person was only on radio. He did Bobby Benson on radio. He was the original Bobby Benson. And he's still with us.
All right.
I'm just trying to get to that website because I'm on the wrong one. Anyways, do you still listen to radio?
Occasionally. I mean, it's like I was actually. I'll tell you the truth. My girlfriend had XM Sirius on her car, and when I drove down to California, I put it on she had Old Time Radio Station on there, and I was listening to the shows on there when I was doing the drive. And it takes 11 hours to get down there and 11 hours back, so listen to a lot of shows. So some Dragnet, some Rocket Ship XM, I think is what it's called. Johnny Dollar, lots of weird stuff. So.
So the guests that I couldn't remember the names of are Linda Day George.
Linda Day George. I said Joanne Fleet. Yeah. Correct me.
Yeah. And Lauren Tuies, who lives here, by the way. She was on Love Boat. She was the stewardess that greeted everybody.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. We had an interview with her live about a year ago, so she has some good stories. I was unaware of this, but she was fired from that show. I didn't know that until we interviewed her. I always thought she was on there from beginning to end, but she was not.
I believe she got to make it polite. I believe she dabbled in a little bit too much drugs at the time.
Yeah. She mentioned that she wasn't avoiding that.
Yeah.
But she can still act because we had to do a couple of radio shows, so she's trying to gradually get in. She does local performance stuff too, and plays. So she's been a good part of our local theater.
Yeah. The only thing that I know about radio that's down here, and I just got one in the mail. Down here in Eugene, we always have Fred Kraft's Radio Redux, or Redo, or however you pronounce it. And they just do various radio shows, or, like in the most recent one, a version of Sunset Boulevard, but on stage, kind of like how you do at the reps, where you have everyone standing at a mic and the sound effects and all that stuff. I haven't seen many of the recent shows, but I saw Wizard of Oz, and they do a pretty good job. But it's a little more pricey than I like, so that's why I don't always go to those. But anyway.
Yeah, they tried to get Margaret O'Brien because she called me up and asked me about those people. I didn't know they even existed until she brought them up last year. So I guess they've been trying to get her too.
Oh, to go to this thing I'm talking about?
Yes, correct.
The Fred Kraft's Radio Redux?
Yeah, I still haven't heard any examples of it, so I'm assuming it's doing all right.
Yeah.
So they're few and far between. Who knows much longer we can continue doing it, because it's a financial struggle to throw these rep showcases on, because we do a lot. Would pay their expenses in the hotel and sometimes an appearance fee. It depends on who it is. But, we get about 300 people through the door.
Yeah. And
it's tough to support. And why I like our showcases versus the comic conventions, because some of them have the same guests, like Kathy Garver or somebody who's doing a comic. Tommy Cook's even done a comic show.
Right.
And but when you come to a reps event, they'll do autographs for free.
Right.
There's no signing table.
Yeah.
And you know this. And you get to sit with them, chat with them, talk with them, hands-on, because they know you appreciate them. You're not there to try to make a buck off them.
Yeah.
And most people aren't. And they know that and they have an affection for radio. Most people I know who've done TV, radio, movies, and plays always find that radio is their most memorable experiences because it was more of a family-oriented atmosphere. And so we'll get some guests that come here for free.
Yeah.
And, like Diana Canover's coming at her own expense. So it's great to see somebody who still has an affection for it. And it shows, because when they get behind the microphone and the light comes on, no matter how old they are, we had Shirley Mitchell, who was on The Great Gildersleeve. She was Leela, with the Southern accent and the Southern drawl. And but when she got behind that microphone, and you close your eyes, it was the same 1940s Leela that you heard back in the day.
Yeah.
It just, for some reason, voices don't age as fast as looks. So that's why some people like Jack Benny or Burns and Allen were on radio for, decades.
Right.
It's because, the aging of the voice isn't noticeable as if you saw him on TV, and that's why it didn't last as long on TV.
Right. Have you ever had Jimmy Weldon up there?
He was on... wasn't he...
He was the voice of Yankee Doodle. That's his biggest claim to fame for Hanna-Barbera.
I don't recall. I don't think so.
Okay. He is 90. He's 95. So, but he's amazing when he gets behind the mic, and I'm sure you've seen this with other actors. It's like he'll be sitting there like in his wheelchair, and then when his line comes up, like he springs to life, and he's like a 20-year-old, and he has all this animation, and puts all his heart and soul into the one line, and then just go back and do.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And that is just, that's lifelong experience that doing it as a professional. No matter what's going on, you have to be that person behind the microphone.
Yeah.
And it just amazes me because that's how we get great performances. We got so much classic radio performances from people who are no longer here that there'll be a generation after us that'll appreciate everything we're doing right now.
Right.
And we're not for profit. I forgot to mention that. So we do it at cost. All donations, dues and stuff like this. So we don't make any money, and the board members are doing it for free. And our whole motto is preserve and promote. So preserve what you got and promote what you got.
Yeah.
And so people donate. Doris Day had her radio shows donated to Birdvac. June Lockhart, she had all of her radio shows and transcription discs donated to Spurvac. Also, Spurvac, because they're in L.A., will get more than we would.
Yeah.
But they come up and help us with our showcase, and we go down there and help them with their showcase. And they just have more money and higher end stuff down there than we do, but we do the best we can here.
Right. I'm surprised that those are the only two shows. I guess for the East Coast, you just get Martin Graham's Mid-Atlantic Convention, and maybe they do a recreation there. I don't know, but
it's a small. What happened was Friends of Old Time Radio was the other one in New Jersey, or Ohio, New Jersey area, and they went out or they closed like 2 or 3 years ago, and Martin Graham's tried to revive it. I don't know if he's still doing it, but I know he's tried to and they have less attendance than we do. And I just told you we only have like 300, so they have less than that. Even Spurvac in L.A., they only get 200 to 300. You've been there.
Yeah.
I've never been to Spurvac, by the way, but I hear about it all the time.
I do have to say this about Spurvac. One of the most amazing things to me is like I will go to people who live in L.A., and I won't name names to save them embarrassment, and they'll go, well, what are you doing tomorrow? I said, I'm going to Spurvac. What's that? Oh, it's an old-time radio convention. They have an old-time radio convention? Yeah, they've had it for like 30, 40 years down here. You don't know it? No. Why don't you go to it? Yeah. It's like they don't know about it. And it's like, and it's kind of weird because these are people that are in the entertainment business. You'd think that they would know this stuff. And okay. Anyway.
And a lot of people have no idea that a lot of 40s and 50s actors started in radio or did radio.
Yeah.
Even Kathy Garver did radio.
Yeah.
And she's not that old. I mean, she's 70-something. But radio died in the late 50s.
Right.
But when she was a little kid, she did a little radio in the early or late 1950s. And so she remembers them fondly. And they usually always do because it's just such a short part of their career. Rod Serling. His wife just died. Carol Serling just died.
Yeah.
Rod Serling started his career in radio on a writing con. Well, he did a lot of local radio for his college, but he was writing scripts for Dr. Christian in a contest and won. And that's how he got his start in the writing and stuff. And he was always that way, wanting to do what we're all familiar with, the Twilight Zones and the Night Gallery and stuff like that. But that's how he started his career, and a lot of people are unaware of that.
Wow.
And, fascinating.
Yes.
And,
Well, hopefully by saying it here, we'll get a few more people that might come up and attend at the end of March, or go to Spurtback. I don't know when that one usually is. Spurtback's usually in the fall, I believe. But
yeah, they're usually November, October,
yeah, something
November,
like that. Yeah.
Because we usually don't try to compete.
Yeah.
Because we usually have the same attendees.
Right.
Going to both.
Right.
And we'll get people from New York flying out here for this event, and but they're all older. I'm 52, and I'm one of the youngest guys there.
Yeah.
So well, Martin Gramps though is a breath of fresh air.
Yes.
Because he's younger than us.
Yes.
He knows more than I do.
Yes,
now.
I'm 53 now, so yeah, it's like, and he's like 20. No, he's like 40, like 41 or something. He's getting up there now, but it's like he looks like he's about 20. But anyway,
And even the people who are attending are passing away, and we have a plethora of experts on. We had members that were either experts on James Dean, Gunsmoke, or Dragnet, and they've all passed away. And there's such a wealth of knowledge that's gone with them that they start to ask me questions, and identifying me as an expert in radio, and I'm like, there was a guy here you should have talked to a couple of years ago before he passed away. He knew a lot more than me, so I'm becoming an expert by attrition.
Right.
It's
happens.
And it's a tough responsibility.
Yeah. It's been wonderful talking to you. We could always do more, and we could do it again. But let's wrap it up by just, you mentioned Retrofan Magazine and Reps, but anything else you'd like to plug?
No, not this time.
Okay.
Those are the ones that people should pay attention to if they have the time. And, we appreciate the support.
All right. And if somebody wanted to get in contact with you, what's the best way to do so? I'm
on Facebook. I'm pretty active on Facebook in lots of groups, but it's Shaun, Shaun, Clancy, Clancy, so you can get a hold of me through that if you need to. Or through Mark.
Hey. I'll say, Shaun who? Anyway. All right. Well, pleasure talking to you again, and I want to thank you for being a podcast guest, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you for listening, and thank you, Shaun Clancy, for being my special guest. Episode number 64 will be coming soon. If you would like to comment and or be a guest on this podcast, please drop me a line at funideas.mark@gmail.com. Become a Patreon of Mark Arnold and Fun Ideas Productions. If everyone listening just contributed $1 a month, that would be a tremendous help in continuing the production of my books and this podcast. Also, subscribe to my YouTube channel. The opening and closing music for the Fun Ideas podcast is provided courtesy of Andrew the Slow Poisoner Goldfarb and is used with permission. This has been the Fun Ideas podcast. This is Mark Arnold speaking. This episode is copyright 2020, Fun Ideas Productions. Thank you, and good night.
Pills in the pink electric church. The final flicker of your illusion.